Good evening, and welcome to ANU's Llewellyn Hall. My name is Kent Anderson, and I'm absolutely delighted to see all of you on what could have been a very wet day, but turned out to be a wonderful evening. Let me begin by saying I acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional land we meet and whose cultures are among the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We celebrate. As the director of the School of Culture, History, and Language at the ANU College of Asia and Pacific, it is indeed a privilege for me to welcome our distinguished speaker, the Honorable Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Member of Parliament and Malaysia's opposition leader. As well as his prominent role in Malaysian politics, he is also an international public figure, a scholar, and a proponent of interfaith dialogue and social justice. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, sir, I welcome you to Canberra, to Australia, and to the ANU. I hope you have a productive and enjoyable visit. The ANU is very proud of its long tradition of academic involvement with Malaysia. The work of many scholars, indeed, of the caliber such as Professors Ian Proudfoot, Virginia Hooker, Tony Miller, Harold Crouch, and more, inspire a new cohort of researchers. And in fact, Anwar Ibrahim's presence in Canberra has been driven by the commitment and enthusiasm of these new students. They represent the transition to the next generation of Malaysia scholars at the ANU. I acknowledge the efforts, and particularly that of the International Students Group, in making this visit happen. Marcus Tan, Xian Ansori, in particular, put tremendous effort into making sure that we have this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Anwar Ibrahim's life and career make him one of the world's most intriguing and controversial figures. Born on the island of Penang, he was educated at the University of Malaya and was active in Muslim student politics. From his days as a student activist, it was perhaps inevitable that a career as national politics lay ahead. Later, his first post was as Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports in the Mahathir government. Later, he served as Agricultural Minister, and importantly, then as Minister for Education from 1986. It is fair to say that the position of Minister of Education in Malaysia politics is a very powerful one. The role has enormous political significance and is seen as a stepping stone to higher things. In Anwar Ibrahim's case, he was expected to succeed Dr. Mahathir as Prime Minister. Anwar did go on to serve as Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, a position he held until 1998. Of recent times in Australia, too, we know about former ministers of education who go on to Prime Minister, very Malaysian-like in our own way. Anwar's fall from grace was as spectacular and even more controversial as his rise to power. In 1998, he was dismissed from office. Many of us will have watched the international media coverage and will be aware that he was sent to prison following a trial which was widely criticized. 6 years later, his conviction was overturned and he was freed. Just a moment ago backstage, Anwar Ibrahim said to me, like many others who have been imprisoned, it's a wonderful time for reading those academic works from scholars of the ANU. On his release in 2004, he became the focal point of a reinvigorated Malaysian opposition. His influence on the outcome of the 2008 general election has been acknowledged, causing the ruling coalition its first setback in over 50 years. Today, Anwar Ibrahim is the Malaysian opposition leader, and he continues to campaign for an independent judiciary and a free media. We are lucky to have him with us this evening because once again, as we are all aware, he is facing another criminal trial. Indeed, one that delayed this talk tonight by a year. In addition to his political commitments in Malaysia, he is also on the international stage in a range of social justice and interfaith activities. He is chair of the Washington-based Foundations of the Future and honorary president of the London-based Institute of Social and Ethical Accountability. He is an eminent scholar of Islam. He is a distinguished senior visiting fellow at Oxford and at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and a visiting professor in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. His talk this evening is entitled Social Justice and Political Change, the Malaysian Experience. As these brief details of his life reveal, he can truly claim firsthand and personal experience of the consequences of challenging political and legal orthodoxies. Ladies and gentlemen, Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Terima kasih banyak. I'm not proceeding Bahasa Malaysia, Indonesia, don't worry. I've been asked by Professor Ken Anderson to confine myself in English language. Professor Ken Anderson, thank you very much for these wonderful remarks. And thank you, in particular, friends of ANU who made this possible. I'm proud in a small way to be associated with this great academic institution. And as Professor Ken said, colleagues here have been extremely kind because one of the few universities that kept on sending their books and articles, particularly when I was in prison. That's only a certain way to make sure I read all of them. So thank you, John Funston, Virginia Hooker, and of course a great scholar of Malaysian history and Islam and Sufism, Professor H. Johns from ANU. Now, I see a nexus in the topic between social justice and democracy. It is apt that I begin my talk on social justice with a clear statement what democracy entails. Now, to cite the name of scholars and philosophers in the presence of Professor Ken, Professor Tom, make it a little difficult. I use this semi-academic hat, so I must be excused. And during Q&A, don't ask me difficult questions. I've suffered immensely at home. Being assaulted, solitary confinement, sleep naked. So just bear in mind when you ask difficult questions. Now, apart from the fundamental requirements of freedom and the rule of law, democracy is also pursued to be defined by the conditions of a free market. And this is where the founding fathers of the French Revolution, with their clarion call for liberty, equality, and fraternity, to my mind, missed the mark. This is because a free market is based on competition, and competition, being a zero-sum game, has no track with equality. On the contrary, free market engenders inequality, so much so that even the bastions of capitalism, such as America and Britain, no longer ask whether states ought to intervene in order to reduce these inequities. The question is to what extent? The invisible hand has remained invisible so often that governments in the free world have not only intervened, but have, in some cases, stake out their territory in areas which were once considered totally off limits. Various explanations have been given. The most defensible, at least in theory, is social justice. According to one view, state intervention is advocated by a soft-hearted majority, while a hard-boiled minority would willingly accept or even rejoice at the inequality, to quote Mansur Olson. This seems to suggest that at least for a certain segment of society, inequality is not seen to be unjust. Defenders of the French Revolution claim that equality has less to do with wealth than with equal treatment before the law. But we all know that deprived of the basic necessities of living, the law is a luxury that the poor man cannot afford. But this begs the question, is there an objective standard of social justice? Philosophers have locked horns on this, and I don't intend to reinvent the wheel here. But to put the issue in proper perspective, John Locke, we are told that every man has by nature the right to possess property as his own. We may therefore reasonably deduce that social justice is not in equation here. John Rawls talks about justice as fairness and advocates the notion of distributive justice. Libertarians, such as Robert Nozick, contend that justice can only be attained through a minimalist state. In other words, there is no room for distributive justice, let alone social justice. In Christianity, particularly under Catholic social teaching, life and dignity of the human person is predicated on the belief that the state must play a moral role to ensure social justice. This is not far from the essence of Mencius teachings in advocating that actions are to be judged by their moral correctness, not merely economic benefit. And in Islam, enjoins that while society may pursue commerce to its fullest, justice and fairness in dealings must remain the chief criterion. I made reference in the Sydney speech to the maqasid of the Sharia. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the whole role and meaning and the higher objectives of the Sharia. That it is meaningless, it is rendered irrelevant if you cannot defend the principles of peace, tolerance, and justice. And social justice is therefore enjoined in order to establish a humane economy. However, you can't be calling for social justice without expecting political change. Inequalities of wealth, power, and status are certainly not the privilege of nations practicing free markets, though it is true that in theory, socialist states have more egalitarian policies. That's only the theory, because reality bites hard, and we know the enormous price that people under socialist regimes had to pay for the so-called egalitarian lifestyle. In campus, there was a huge debate, at least during my generation, that we say either without growth, there's no equity. And to talk to the socialist friends, we would say, you distribute. But what can you distribute without growth? You distribute poverty. It's safe to say this statement now, but in the 70s you'll be in real trouble because of the extent of the influence, pervasive influence of the left. Now, political change is therefore a condition precedent to attaining social justice if it is shown that society is heading down the road to greater social perdition under its present government. There must be a political will to change its socio-economic policies. In this regard, the Economic Transformation Program that was recently unveiled by Dato Seri Najib, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, best analysis. The numbers are astounding. impressive, if not altogether mind-boggling. All told, we are looking at more than 1 trillion ringgit in so-called expansionary development in projects calculated at transforming a middle-income economy to a high-income economy. But on closer analysis, we are unable to connect the dots to see the critical mass in poverty reduction programs that will be needed to narrow the current gap between the rich and the poor. To seriously address the growing Gini coefficient, general and vague expressions of targeting for higher per capita income simply won't do. We don't see concrete plans to address the housing problems of the poor and a blueprint for a universal free education, or to be precise, access or democratization of access to quality education. We don't see any comprehensive health care for those who can't afford private medication and hospitals. What we see is a frenzied conviction to outdo the megalomaniacal visions of the Mahathir era. We see the grandiose designs, humongous structures, buildings taller than KLCC Twin Tower, and other mega projects that are destined to make crony companies outperform others in the share market, and the rich and the powerful richer and more powerful. So we see monumental wastage at the expense of the people and the environment. We see the future of our children and the generations to come being sacrificed on the altar of greed and the illegitimate amassing of wealth. This is what is called the rent-seeking culture that will continue with the manner in which multi-million ringgit contracts are doled out. The issues of governance, transparency and accountability are not addressed even as the indices of transparency and corruption continue to drive investors away. Transforming an economy cannot be done through mere theory. The litmus test is its implementation. The condition precedent to passing this test is to put an end to the culture of corruption, rent-seeking, and power abuse. I make no apology for calling a more equitable distribution of wealth, in as much as I make no apology for maintaining the safeguarding of fundamental liberties is also one of the main ends of political and social justice. These liberties are of paramount importance. But as Amartya Sen has argued, other considerations, including that of economic needs, are just as vital. To my mind, Amartya Sen has posed a stunningly simple but compelling question. Why should the status of intense economic needs, which can be matters of life and death, be lower than that of personal liberties? In my humble view, some basic formulations for the attainment of social justice must be advanced. Governments, in this context, the Malaysian government, must be committed to the principle that a more equitable distribution of income is a fundamental precept for the realization of social justice. I urge my government to undertake integrated plans for poverty eradication, ensuring a comprehensive support system for the poor and economically marginalized, checked again by the principles of governance and accountability. Are we supposed to sit idly by as politicians in public office continue to renege on their promises of social justice while scandalizing the institutions of power with abuse and corrupt practices? But the approach is starting different from what is known as the new economic policy. We introduced the new economic policy in 1970, restructuring of society, eradication of poverty. Generally, it was, I must say, quite well received. But after decades of implementation, this race-based economic program and agenda is no longer tenable. Billions of dollars, billions of ringgit, of shares, contracts, privatization, squandered by the few. Ruling members of the ruling elite aligned to the top leaders. So you have numbers of ethnic Chinese or Indian billionaires, and then we want to make sure that there are enough ethnic Malay billionaires. So we then line up. The richest 3 top Malay billionaires happen to be number 1, the son of the former Prime Minister. Number 2, the brother of the present Prime Minister. Regrettably, a family member of the former Deputy Prime Minister is absent. And number 3, of course, one of the cronies. So, does this actually answer the problem of poverty and marginalization among either ethnic Malays or Indians or Chinese or Ibans or Kadazans? It does not. That's why the discourse on social justice and political change in the context of Malaysia must be seen in the light of multicultural makeup where communal tensions run the risk of being exploited by sectarian demagoguery, to use a phrase, the Amartya Sen's phrase. We must therefore reject ideological rigidity and the politics of hate and exclusiveness in all its forms. Politics of this kind engender divisive barriers, whether they are founded on ethnicity, language, or religion. It's often only after the fact, when events of cataclysmic nature unfold, that the policymakers and social pundits get jolted to the reality that freedom could be meaningless without food on the table, or that the rule of law may still discriminate on grounds of caste, wealth, and status. This is the caveat, the mental construct we should bear in mind when we talk about social justice and political change in Malaysia. The stark reminder that peace in our time must be more important than just material progress. In a multicultural society like Malaysia, it is therefore incumbent on leaders to shoulder the responsibility as protectors of this fragility. We must condemn, in the strongest terms, the racist chanting of modern-day demagogues. Professor Ken made reference to the 2008 elections, where we in the Pakatan Rakyat, in the opposition People's Alliance, managed to garner 51% of the popular vote in Malaya. We lost Sabah in Sarawak, it's true, the rural hinterland in Borneo. But the response by the ruling establishment, UMNO in particular, is therefore to consolidate the Malay base. Instead of responding by showing that they can reform themselves, respect democracy and the rule of law, they became more vigilant and used the notion of racial or Malay supremacy to ensure that they consolidate the majority Malays with them. My response in the heart of Malay base in Kampung Baru, near Kuala Lumpur, is that after half a century of independence, we should not be talking about a racial Malay supremacy. My retort was, it's time that after half a century, we are talking about the supremacy of the people. It's vox populi. Not necessarily vox populi, vox dei, It became another source of another controversy. Let Professor Ken deal with the subjects. But at least for us, the voice of conscience, the voice and the conscience of the majority, that is important. The majority means the Malays, Chinese, Indians, the Ibans and the Kadazans. At the very least, we would expect such leaders to urge for inclusiveness. Now, I use the term inclusiveness, is a very loaded term. The strength of Islam in Southeast Asia is because of its inclusivity. The strength of Muslim parties like Masyumi in that tradition soon after Indonesian independence and their participation in the elections of 1955 is the inclusivity, a tolerant Islam, both culturally, socially, at ease with Ramayana Mahabharata, but at the same time not necessarily diluting their faith and moral values. Preparedness to include Christians and Hindus, although it's a very small minority in Indonesia, then explains why we can ensure a quick, easy transformation after 3 decades of dictatorial rule in Indonesia to emerge as a vibrant democracy. It cannot be considered a small development. To me, it's one of the most phenomenal political development for the whole century, for the largest Muslim country in the world to emerge in the short span of time and transform itself into a vibrant democracy, huge, vibrant discourse on the principle of the rule of law, how to combat corruption, which is still endemic and problematic, and to ensure a just distribution of wealth. To paraphrase Macbeth, again, I made reference today during luncheon today, one of the, not advantage, but I think consolation on hindsight, the fact that you were in solitary confinement for 6 years is the time you can read all these classical texts and reread Shakespeare 4.5 times, the complete works, with copious notes. So I can paraphrase Macbeth. They should, against the murderer, shut the door, not bear the knife themselves. It is dealing with religious or racial extremism. So I remain an incorrigible optimist, despite the odds, the lack of free media. Don't assume that I get to speak in the universities like I do at the ANU. I speak here, yesterday at the University of Sydney, but I can't even enter any university in Malaysia. You know the reason? Because our universities have a far superior standard compared to the ANU. They say, there is freedom of speech, of course. You can have the microphone and say whatever you like. I've said so here. In Malaysia too, we have freedom of speech. The only difference, you don't have freedom after speech. They call me, and Professor Ken proudly says, this is the leader of opposition. Fair. Sounds great. Leader of opposition in this system, in Australia or in the UK. There, in Malaysia, leader of opposition. I don't have even 1 minute of airtime. So they were surprised. Why am I entertaining ABC News, Sky News all the time? It's the only time I can speak or be interviewed by the television network. So make full use of my time in Australia. So thank you again. I would welcome questions after that. Thank you.
Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, thank you very much for those comments, those challenging at times, humorous at times, but always heartfelt comments with regards to the current situation in Malaysia. You have given us much to think about, and we wish you very well for the rest of your trip, and hopefully more trips to come to give you opportunity to make those comments. We look forward to welcoming you back soon and again. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Anwar Ibrahim. Professor Ibrahim, Dr. Ibrahim, has agreed to take questions from the audience. And we've got 2 microphones set up on each side of the stage. It's always a little bit hard getting the first person who breaks the ice and begins the conversation, but I'll act as a bit of an air traffic controller. But anyone with questions or thoughts, please come forward now, either right or left hand, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim, for a stimulating lecture. You touched on in your lecture discrimination, and I was just wondering whether during your time in prison under the trumped-up false charges of sodomy, whether it's made you reflect on whether that should still be a criminal offence, and more generally, whether it's time for Islam to embrace a more tolerant, less punitive, more enlightened view of homosexuality.
Why do you choose to ask such an embarrassing question? You know how difficult it is. If I say no, they say, confirm your position. If I say yes, then you are a closet Islamist. So, let me. Let me put it this way, I'm a man of faith. I cherish family values. I believe in the sanctity of family life. But I'm not here to cast aspersions or judgment on people's personal choice. There are certain rules you have to abide. What your personal choice is beyond the public sphere is not my business. As I said, I reiterate, a man of faith. I believe in the sanctity of family life. I'm blessed with a pretty excellent wife, Aziza, and beautiful children. And incidentally, when she's Irish trained ophthalmologist, and when I was sent to prison, she was just a good Asian wife, a good mother, and a professional ophthalmologist. After 6 years, she was president of the party. And mind you, a staff, because she tends to disagree with me on many issues. So, that's a position, which means we will have to have laws to abide. The problem is not such only the position of the laws, it's the way the laws are being abused. There is, you use Islam in the pretext of public morality. But you know what happened in Malaysia? Last month, a 10-year-old boy caned for consuming pork in school. The argument, a Muslim cannot eat pork. Now, where in the Sharia, where in our law, where any procedures that bar, they can rationalize that sort of decision. And in this case, it was established that this boy, declared by the authorities as a Muslim, is actually a Christian. Is this something to do with Islam? No. This is it by an Islamist or part of Islamization? No. But this is pure, plain hypocrisy, the use of religion by the powers that be. And the powers that be are quite secular in outlook, not even religious. Early this year, a young girl sentenced to imprisonment and caning for drinking a glass of beer. Do I drink? No. Do I encourage my children to drink? No. I'm a Muslim. But do I believe that this is the way you promote religion and implement? No. Worse is when you are esteemed to be hypocritical in your decision. You know the rich and famous in 5-star, 6-star hotels drink, the Muslims. But because they're rich and famous, it is tolerated or condoned. This poor girl gets punished. And I also tell you know for a fact that you look and Google San Miguel in the Philippines. The majority controlled by a very prominent ex-UMNO leader and his company, a Muslim. You see, the rich, famous Muslim not only can, it's not a matter of drinking one glass of beer, or not one what do you call, box, or one factory. The entire industry they control. Where's the Mufti? Where are the religious scholars? But when it comes to a young girl, there's a problem. Similar, the issue of Allah. The banning of the word Allah, the Christians can use the term Allah. I consulted even prominent scholars. It's a non-issue. A Muslim will recite, praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, heaven and earth and the worlds. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. How on earth can one decide to deny Christians translating the word Lord to Allah? It's their business. I also know that the patriarch of the Orthodox, Orthodox Greek Church, if I'm not mistaken, in Jerusalem, his name is Ata'ullah Hanna. So I met him in Georgetown University. I told him, Reverend Sir, if you are welcome to Malaysia. He said, Inshallah. I said, be careful. And then he said, you come, can you change your name to Ata'u-God or Ata'u-Lord Hana? He said, why? Because it's an offense to use the word Allah. You see, it makes a mockery of the religion. So let me put in that context. But having said that, we are guided by, as people of faith, rules. So do I therefore allow this? I mean, drinking for non-Muslims is not a problem. You talk about homosexuality, it's not to be encouraged. And it's a purely personal affair. But it's not tolerated in a society. But finally, it's society that decides. And that's my personal position. And they say, what if Malaysians then go to a referendum and vote otherwise? I will have to concede with the vox populi, the voice of the majority. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your thought-provoking speech. I have a question on climate change. And it seems like, given the urgency of climate change, perhaps an authoritarian regime would be best in belting out the most efficient policies. And this potentially contradicts with social justice. So how do you think that you can balance the tension between the urgency of this problem and social justice?
All right. Now this relates to the notion of Asian values. You know, leaders like Lee Kuan Yew, Dr. Mahathir, talks about a strong leadership, authority, condescending, of course, because they assume that they know best. You are assuming that these authoritarian leaders actually respect the notion of justice or environment. I don't believe so. But even if that's done, then who gives you what legitimacy? Who decides that you should speak on behalf of the people? You know the problem in the Muslim world now. This whole talk about the fight against terrorists or pockets of extremism. Worse, in countries having leaders with no legitimacy. When President Barack Obama, in his Cairo speech, talks about dialogue, respect, engaging with the Muslims, my response is this: good. You engage with leaders. Tell me, who claim the leaders must be legitimate, who can articulate on behalf of their people. Otherwise, then other than wise. You have cases like the Middle East or most countries where they assume they represent the circumstances of the people, but not respected. I mean, Indonesia, Turkey may be an exception. So it is very important, therefore, to my mind. And this is, of course, this whole theory of Asian values is debunked in the Development as Freedom by Amartya Sen. First is the issue of legitimacy. And the issue of freedom and democracy is not something you can negotiate. We struggle. The Indonesians lost hundreds and thousands of lives. The French, the Algerians, the Vietnamese. For what? For freedom. Call it democracy or mushawara, whatever. But it's for freedom. Not to replace the colonial rule with these indigenous dictators. So that to me is fundamental. And if the leadership is legitimate, if the media is free, the country is democratic, it's very difficult to go on with this sort of the rape of the environment, say massive problem of emission, carbon emission in Sarawak from this mangrove soil. One of the worst cases of carbon emission. I mean, the country is authoritarian. They can decide tomorrow, nothing, and nobody would object. But they fail because they are complicit to the crime, to the rape and the corruption in these places. So to my mind, probably with very, very exception, that you have authoritarian leaders understanding precise need of their people. But we're taking major risk here. That is why the best option is still to allow society at large to think, reflect for themselves, to ensure that people can criticize and demand change. Because the worst crime committed, even under climate change, there's been an extensive study by mostly authoritarian regimes. Because the pressure for change and to be concerned for the climate and environment is so compelling that any free media will not tolerate these excesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. With the declining economies of the West and the increasing relevance of Sharia-compliant investment funds from the Gulf and elsewhere filling that gap, I was interested in your thoughts on what impact globally Islamic finance can potentially have as a synthesis of the principles both of economic growth but also of social justice, and obviously this is things like the forbidding of charging and interest and similar things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. First, let us realistically look at the global economic scenario. Professor Thomas will bear with me on this. Is it true that the West is declining? I mean, this is what is termed as Spengerian pessimism, Oswald Spengler, that the West is going to decline. I think it's a bit too far-fetched. California is one state, has stronger resources, economy than the entire ASEAN. So realistically put, although it has declined slightly in its role internationally, it is there. Economic fundamentals are quite strong. This is different. Now, as using the economic hat, it's different. You are based. You have to rely on statistics and facts. I'm a political philosophy. I'm quite a liberal. But you look at the economic principles. I mean, therefore, I choose to be more critical of the United States policies in Iraq or in Afghanistan. But to deny, to assume that they're declining fast, I don't think it's quite correct. To suggest that there's emergence of new economies like China is correct. Even then, realistically, it would still take time because the potential is there, but it's still some time to go to reach that real competitive edge or advantage. Now you talk therefore of the Sharia alternative, or Sharia compliant Islamic institutions, financial institutions or banking system. I'm a great proponent of that. I started this Islamic banking operations in Malaysia. But to suggest that it can be, it is a small viable alternative. To assume it's going to replace, again, it's far-fetched. It's giving the options. It's like microcredit or agricultural bank or these alternatives you should allow to flourish. The system must not be prejudiced just because it is a cooperative bank or Islamic bank. But it's time that we reflect. I had the opportunity to present a case at Harvard some years back in front of the Islamic bankers in the banking community and the central bankers from Muslim countries. I said you have to even rethink the whole notion and concept of Islamic banking. You see, Islamic banks cannot run away from the maqasid of the Sharia, which means the higher objective of the Sharia. What they do now is to introduce instruments, sophisticated financial instruments applied in the conventional banking system. That's all. And there's no riba, no usury, period. It can be exploitative. It doesn't give a viable alternative that is far superior, that can ensure there is greater social justice as you assume. Not necessarily so. It talks about Qadr Hassan, very limited sense. Now, I do participate. I mean, in fact, I do advise one or two. I'm not an economist or a banker, but because of my limited experience, I've been asked to do that for a good fee. So certainly I did that. Okay. But I told them, you must be thinking beyond that box of central bank supervision, Basel I, Basel II, Basel III, but these are requirements to make sure it is transparent, accountable, with proper regulatory procedures being followed, adhered to. That's all. But what about, a system, a financial system that could trickle down? The whole idea of Islamic banking to make sure it is a more popular based compared to conventional banks. You take all the successful conventional banks in Malaysia, Indonesia, most developing economies, has no bearing, no relevance to the at least half the population. So you've learned about the initiative by Fernando de Soto. It's one example of giving value to the property or land. So we have, to my mind, you talk about Islamic banking, we are talking beyond the conventional practice, and that we are not yet ready. So unless you are prepared to do that, then I don't see it as something original, phenomenal, or spectacular, other than satisfying most Muslims and saying that no usury. That's all. So Islamic bank is a riba-free bank. That's all. Period. It's not an Islamic bank that can cater for the higher objectives of ensuring social justice, participation, and looking at the enormous potential, for example, of the women in the workforce. There have been extensive studies, Harvard review on this subject, but the Islamic bank is not yet prepared to tap this, and therefore it certainly not able to be seen as an viable alternative. Yes, in the period of these convulsions, financial convulsions that affected many of the big financial institutions, the Islamic banks are less affected. I remember a session in London, chaired by Vice President Al Gore. He asked me immediately this question, I know, why is it that the Islamic banks somehow or other are less, or initially, but now quite a number of banks are quite badly affected too, but less so compared to the major financial institutions in the United States. Because it's collateral based, it's asset based, it's not speculative in the sense, or share based, it's asset based. So you actually hold to real asset. But these are areas that we should explore and expand. The principle of musharaka of a bank, which is a bit like a venture capital. You participate, you lose together or you gain together. Not like the conventional banks that can bankrupt the company if the bank stays steady. If the banks encounter problems in Malaysia, you bail out. In the United States, you bail out. Minimal risk. The rich gets bailed out. The poor sink like the Titanic. You know the story with the Titanic? You go full speed ahead, and you give a word caution, slow down, but it's no. Our fundamental is strong, full speed ahead. Then crash. The rich and famous, all saved. And Leonardo DiCaprio and the rest, sink. So this cannot happen, and certainly not in an Islamic banking system. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Anwar. Thank you very much for the enlightening speech. I have some questions about some laws in many countries, especially some countries in the Southeast Asia. Those laws are, for example, the ISA, or Internal Security Act in Malaysia, or the La Majesté law in neighboring country, Thailand. Now, I agree that when it was first implemented, it served some good purposes, probably for stability or social harmony. But I feel like nowadays, it has been used more for political purposes, for example, on your opposite side. So, from your point of view, what do you think these laws, will it be an obstacle to like democracy and freedom of speech? Okay, thank you.
The Internal Security Act is like the Patriots Act in the States recently. First introduced by the British in their combat against militant communists. In 1961, the ruling party introduced this legislation with a clear statement. It is meant as a tool to arrest before the perpetration of the act or crime, because our battle is against militant communists. Period. But you know, since 61, thousands, student leaders, youth leaders, political leaders, trade union leaders arrested without trial. I was arrested first time for 2 years without trial under the Internal Security Act. In 1998, when I was arrested, after I was badly assaulted, because they wanted to hide me so that's not seen the injuries, they then signed an order under the Internal Security Act to protect the crime perpetrated by the Inspector General of Police. Now, this is not something peculiar to what happened to Anwar Ibrahim, but thousands of others. So, it has been abused. And we don't have militant communists in Malaysia. Now, even we have adequate legislation to deal with it. We don't need draconian laws to instill fear. So everybody talks about, I can't support you because you have the ISA. That's what the culture of fear is all about. You see, our commitment in the People's Alliance, the moment we take over, we dismantle this act. Doesn't mean that we are soft on crime or soft on these terrorist cells. We'll be tough with them. There's no compromise. You perpetrate violence, we'll deal with you accordingly. But you must accept, respect, due process. I'm not prosecutor, investigator, prosecutor, judge, like in Alice in Wonderland. At the same time, you see, you know the judgment prior to the trial. I'm very familiar with that. So it's important that we struggle. I said a good example in Indonesia. I asked President Habibie in Munich after my surgery. I asked him, why did you dismantle these laws? Give an instruction for free media, release all political prisoners. Just one day after you took over power. Professor Kent didn't like this because he didn't cite John Locke or whatever sophisticated philosophical theories. He just said, my conscience, I don't know, I'm answerable to the people and to God. If I have evidence, charge them. If I don't, I have to release them. I think sometimes we need also simple analogy. As long as you're prepared to act, it's a question of the dictate of conscience. And with the dictate of conscience, you have a courage of conviction to deal with the subject. But you can't have these laws. Who decides? Minister of Home Affairs. Detain you for how long? 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. Without trial. So, well, it does not happen to you. It happens to be somebody else. But remember, it can even happen to you or your family members at any time. I'm a Malay Muslim. When I heard this case of Kogan, this young Hindu by the name of A. Kogan, beaten to near death, beaten to death in the police custody, I feel very strongly. I was badly assaulted, but at least became international news. But who will talk about Kogan? Who will defend him? That's why we came up and said, look, this cannot happen. The perpetrators of this crime must be held accountable. Then, another case, Beng Hok, fell from the 14th floor under the custody of Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. Young, idealist, supporter of the reform agenda. Do you tolerate this or condone this? Because there's fear. You keep quiet. If you say much, you are a threat to national security, you can be arrested. You can't have this. You must have people, particularly the young, with some courage. Because you ask them a very simplistic answer. Why did, explain, how did he fall? I don't know, by probably accident. He was a bit too hot or warm inside the investigation room. He looked and peeped through the window. He fell. Now, why did this Kogan die? How did he die? Probably, he was just tapping his stomach and something happened. He died. And then what about Anwar's black eye? Self-inflicted. You can't have this. You cannot fool people and turn them to be idiots. That's why I believe that this draconian law, we have universities and University College Act. Students cannot participate in any political activity except to support the ruling party. Yeah, you look at the UMNO General Assembly, hundreds of students were invited. They appear in our one annual program, immediately suspension or be sacked from the university. We have Printing Act. Any pamphlet, newspaper, not licensed by the Ministry of Home Affairs will be banned, you'll be charged and jailed. What is this? Hitler? Stalin? So that's why I think we have to make a stand. Many people know. Malaysia is generally a peaceful country, relatively economically quite successful, good infrastructure. So all are forgiven. So I take a strong position in this. Of course, I'll be attacked. I have been attacked. Malaysia used to, I'm so desperate. Now he's appealing to students and staff of the ANU to defend him. So what? Please do defend me in this case. Yes, please. Now, whether you're, I'm not the level of, neither am I Martin Luther King nor Barack Obama. I'm just a kampong boy trying to do my best to initiate change, and I'm grateful and thankful to Allah that we still generate a lot of support, not only among ethnic Malays, but huge support among ethnic Chinese, Indians, and friends. It is a horrendous, arduous task, major risk, and 1 foot here, 1 foot in prison. I'm still having to undergo that ordeal. Just trump up charges just to embarrass and smear. So that's all that I can do and say. It's not easy, not only for me, but for Aziza and my children, his staff. I am not complaining because it's a commitment. I have a choice. I can make the millions and join them, or leave the country for a more comfortable post. But I've made this commitment and choice, and let's proceed. And as long as I'm deemed to be relevant, I'll continue. But I'm, again, I say blessed, because there are many of us, and leaders of Keadilan, of DAP, of PAS, civil society organizations, who are very, very supportive and committed to this reform agenda. So I think we'll continue and pursue this program. I know, sometimes it makes me happy. I was exhilarated when I heard about Aung San Suu Kyi's release, and particularly Aziza. Aziza says a strong personal bond with Aung San Suu Kyi. But still, I'm mindful of the fact that this euphoria cannot be overstretched, because the system is still under military junta, is still repressive, and Aung San Suu Kyi is not calling for her freedom alone. It's freedom for the Burmese people. So let us move on. On Zaid, Dato Seri Ibrahim, former Minister of Law, joined the party. He has been, he has done his part, but he's just a newcomer. He just joined the party, left UMNO, and we gave him, therefore, reasonable recognition. After a week of joining the party, we elevated him to the highest political bureau. After 6 months, asked him to contest in the elections for parliamentary constituency. He lost. He disappeared for some time, then came back. He asked for a different position. We gave him the position of chief of the federal territory. He decided to contest the deputy presidency. There's no inhibition in that. He went quite steady. Then he started, sounding like a UMNO, sort of a stalwart, and the party rejected him in the elections, particularly in Sabah, which he claimed to be his stronghold. There's nothing. We did not interfere in the process. And now, of course, he's working with the UMNO media. The UMNO media, the ruling party media, daily, not attacking the corruption in the government, but attacking there's no democracy because you lost. Now, I say this, notwithstanding the allegations, if I have one fact or evidence to support any claim of any fraudulent practice in the electoral process of the party, we'll take action. My very close clique, former Secretary General of the party, leader of the party in Negeri Sembilan, a member of parliament, was defeated in the elections. Zaid got more support from more divisions than the second strongest candidate, Azmin Ali. Although in terms of votes, Azmin managed to muster from our strong base. So how could you say that the process is fraudulent? The state minister in Selangor lost in the party race in the assembly. So I think if you have any evidence, I don't play to the gallery with UMNO. But the whole, how do UMNO fight us? Man, they've stripped us naked, beat us to near death, imprison us, still we come out strong. They abuse us, then the party for 12 years, nothing that the party says is to be right. For 12 years, they were not successful. We're still quite formidable, together with the Islamic Party and the Democratic Action Party. What else can be done is to use people within the party and attack us. But I believe, inshallah, we'll overcome. This is a temporary, transient. What's important is the base. Who are our supporters, mind you? Yes, there's some academics, civil society, not the rich and famous, not the corporate giants, no. You go to Malaysia, the taxi driver, the hotel workers, the laborers, the students, the youth, these are our core supporters. And as long as they have confidence in us, we will stay. You remember Nurul Izam, my daughter, when she fought against a very senior minister, the UMNO Women's Section head, Shahrizad Jalil, a senior minister, who went and campaigned for her. All these big tycoons, the richest Malays, the billionaires went and campaigned for her, for the minister. Najib's brother, the top billionaire, the owner of Air Asia, Tony Fernandez. So when I went in campaign, who were with her? The young professionals, taxi drivers, workers, and they decide, according to democratic practice, determine the victory. So I remain upbeat. We will have to wait until the party elections is over, and we will have to present new set of leaders, particularly among the young, because our base is still, although I'm not that young, although I look young. But the base support has always been the young. You know, in 2008, 70% of those under 30 gave their support and vote to us. In my constituency that I represent, replacing Aziza as a member of parliament, 75% of those under 30, 75% voted for me. I almost lost among those above 60. Above 70, I lost a few votes. So it's okay. So hopefully, no, it's not good to say hopefully things change. I mean, hopefully they also realize and support us. Now, okay. Now, on Islamic laws. Now, PAS is an Islamic party. It shares the Islamic ideals. Yes. But it's not a dogmatic party. It's not the Taliban. It has participated in the elections since 1955. It's ruling the state of Kelantan. Yes, they have inclusion of more Islamic elements in the state, but not one temple demolished. The temple demolished is by UMNO leaders in Slama, not under PAS. But now, in the coalition, the People's Alliance, we not only, this is not a post-election coalition, it is a pre-election now. So we formulated this agenda in detail, including the more contentious issues such as conversion. You know, conversion among the Muslims is a huge issue. We were able to deal with this. Gender equality, dismantling the new economic policy, freedom of expression, and of course, the role and extent and limit of the Sharia courts. This was dealt. Yes, you ask me, do I support the establishment of Sharia court? Yes, for Muslim personal law. Where the problem starts when you use these courts to compel the rest. There was a case of Murti that you mentioned this now. Mrs. Murti, a Hindu, challenged the decision to declare her husband a Muslim, went to the civil court, the judge refused to consider the case, adjudicate the case. Was the judge right? The judge was wrong. Because the law made it explicitly clear that only a Muslim can be adjudicated in the Sharia court, but not to compel a non-Muslim. So the problem is not the law, and the problem is not with the Islamic Party. The problem is with the so-called secular UMNO. Now, can I therefore assure you that some demands deemed as unreasonable, pushed by PAS, can be rejected? Now, the understanding is, the mechanism in our system is through the consensus of the three parties. And this is not just a policy statement. We have seen it being applied in the states that we control, particularly the multi-religious, multiracial states of Penang and Selangor. And look at the positive side. Selangor, major deficit, huge waste under the past administration, including a chief minister that spent 1.5 million ringgit to bring the entire family to Disneyland, claimed from the state coffers. Now, you have the chief minister going for an official visit with one staff. And as a result, we can balance the budget in the time of economic crisis. Penang under Lim Guan Eng, deficit state for years. Ask him to manage the state for 2 years, 2.5 years. We have a surplus. You know why? We have reduced this huge wastage in the state. The whole issue of economic management is an issue of governance. So people, economics, I don't know, faculty of economics here is quite powerful, I grant that. But it's not just economic theory, it's what you do. It's actually managing it. The issue is good governance, transparency, accountability. Does not matter Washington consensus. I was criticized being American agent, Jewish agent. Why? Because I talk about transparency and accountability as Minister of Finance. So you mean to say you have transparency, you are American. You are corrupt, you are Muslim. It's the most stupid, unreasonable statement you can have. I think when it comes to transparency, it's transparency. It's a universal construct. You use a modern term, accountability. But I can defend it from Islamic tradition, classical tradition. There's a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, "Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyyati." Any Arab here? None, I'm safe. No, which means you're all accountable, responsible and accountable for your action, and you'll be questioned by the people and ultimately by God. So the inculcation of responsibility, accountability is there. But it's not applied. That means, not that the Muslims don't, no, it's not applied. You know, in schools we learn this. We memorize this, but we don't apply it. Some of the most blatantly corrupt, unaccountable regimes are Muslim countries. But it's nothing to do with the religion. It's actually the actualization of such ideals and application of these principles. So that is, to my mind, the relevance of Islam. People, this afternoon with the academic staff discussion, people ask, "Oh, Anwar, you were also responsible, in the 70s, 80s, bringing Islamization, and you have this goatee for a long time. What makes you think this is Islamic? It can be a goatee, it can be Ho Chi Minh, it can be a Guevara. But it's completely irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. What is important is, what do we inculcate? Did I actually promote the understanding of Islam? Yes. Do I want Muslims and non-Muslims to understand Islam? Yes. Our failure now in many of the Muslim countries is because of our failure to grasp with the understanding of Islam. It's either taqleed, just blind acceptance, the rejection of ijtihad, which was amplified by this great Indian scholar Muhammad Iqbal in the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. The failure to even be creative and think and reflect. That is a problem. So is that something wrong for us to promote this understanding? But don't ever forget that I also was, in a way, small way, responsible in promoting the understanding of Confucianism among Malaysians, including among Muslims. Because Christianity is important, Hinduism is important, but in this region, in Asia, Confucianism is so important. So I initiated this conference, Islam and Confucianism. And we brought probably one of the greatest scholar of neo-Confucianism, Professor Tu Wei-Ming of Harvard. And it's interesting what Tu Wei-Ming said. He said that I've been, in the last 2.5 months I've been studying Islam, because Anwar gave me the topic Islam and Confucianism. So I will promote, my understanding of Confucianism, but I have to understand Islam. You know my response? I said, I have to reread Confucius, because the subject is Islam and Confucianism. So this is, and when he said that, as one of probably the most outstanding scholar of Neo-Confucianism, it means a lot among the Chinese. Does it mean that he therefore promote Islam at the expense of Confucianism? No. But you see, this is, to my mind, more relevant in the context. Don't get just sloganeering Islamic State, secular. In the University of Sydney, I was asked to address the topic quasi-secular state. I don't, universities have that problems. No, but thank you very much. Therefore, it compels me to really understand what quasi-secular is all about. And then I could distinguish between the laicity of the French and secularism and of the United States. There's a vast difference. But anyway, I'm getting extending it a bit too far. So, multiculturalism, the final question, is this. What I've alluded to. You have to accept the fact, yes, Muslims are the majority in Malaysia, but it's a multicultural, multiracial country. Majority means what? 58, 55, 56%? So, what do you do with 40%? You consider them all irrelevant? No, they are equal citizens of the country. They've been there for more than half a century. Can't talk about, you're sending back to some of these UMNO leaders. You send them back. Where? To China. So I was joking with my friend who's an accountant. I said, if they ask you to go back to China, what happens? I have a problem. Why? I don't know where to go. You see? But you see this, if this is said in Australia, it will be the big revulsion. It's a revolting statement. It's unacceptable. But in Malaysia, it's tolerated and condoned. See? I don't want my brothers and sisters, the ethnic Chinese or Indians, to feel that. No. I want them to feel now, after half a century, we're here together. And I use even the terms in Chinese, Hua and Intor and Malay and woman to serve each other. So that's multiculturalism in a real sense. But is it easy? No. We still have extremist fringe among the Malays who say, Anwar, you're getting to be too liberal. You want to appease the Chinese a bit more. And then you have some Indian extremists, no, you are not Hindu enough, you're not giving enough attention to the Hindus. And then the same, the Chinese, we want more allocation for Chinese. This is bound to happen. But one thing they should not question, our commitment for multi-religious, multicultural Malaysia. That's where we belong. This is our land, it's our country. It cannot be hijacked by any extremist force. Terima kasih. Thank you.